we always need to be working out what lights us up as individuals, because that is just as important as bringing up children in this world. And I think it's really easy to forget that there is so much out there that we can find so much joy and so much fulfillment from that doesn't involve having kids.
I'm Keltie McGuire, and you're listening to the Kids Are Childfree podcast.
Hello and welcome to the Kids Are Childfree podcast. Today I'm speaking with guest Lucy Meggeson, who is a coach. She is the host of the Thrive Solo podcast, and she is a very soon to be published author. In fact, by the time you listen to this episode, there is a good chance that her book is out in the big wide world. Now, Lucy hosts the Thrive Solo podcast, and she has a forthcoming book by the same name, which we're going to hear about today. It's also, I should mention, being published as Shiny Happy Singles, depending which continent you are on. You'll hear about that in just a moment. But we're going to be talking about being child-free and being single, and that these are not the terrible, terrible fates that so many people think that they are. In fact, these can be conscious choices that we make, that life as a single person without kids can be joyful and fulfilling and fun. And Lucy is here to inspire you with both her story as well as the coaching work she does to support women who are single and child-free. We have so much good stuff in store for you today. So without further ado, I will allow you to meet today's guest, Lucy Meggeson. Lucy, this conversation's been a long time coming, because I was on your podcast, Thrive Solo, back when it was called Spinsterhood Reimagined.
Yes.
A few years ago now.
Yeah, I mean, I think you were one of my very early guests. It's funny because seeing you today, it does feel like a long time ago, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It's bizarre,
it's
but
been
it's
a while.
great to be here. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Well, you've been on my long list of guests I'd love to have on the podcast, and you jumped to the very, very front of the line when I found out that you have an incredible book that will be coming out as we listen to this tomorrow, or perhaps with people listening, the book is already out. So before we delve into your story and the wonderful world of being both single and child-free, I'd love for you to just share a little bit about yourself and, of course, the book and whatever else we need to know.
Thanks, Keltie. So gosh, I don't know how far back to go, really. I mean, I suppose the first thing I will start by saying is that I never planned to talk about being single and not having kids. It just happened. I kind of fell into it. But sort of rewinding several years, living in London, as I had been for, many, many years, in my flat in West London. And to cut a very long story short, I used to work in production at BBC Radio 2. I was in my very last relationship that I've had. So that was nearly 8 years ago now. And it wasn't a great relationship. And I basically ended up leaving that job and randomly becoming a detective for about 5 seconds. Absolutely hated it. Ended up leaving it. And this was just at the very, very, very beginning of the pandemic. And I think for a long, long time, I'd had an intuitive feeling that I wanted more from my life. I felt like I'd been doing jobs for years that were kind of okay, but even at Radio 2, which was kind of like my, quote, dream job, but actually even there I just didn't feel like I was fulfilling my potential. And in fact, at Radio 2, I always had this secret desire to be behind the microphone on the other side of the glass, rather than, the side of the glass that I would be on. So I'd had this feeling for a long time that I wanted more from my life, and that I knew that I was kind of capable of more, and I had more potential that I wanted to fulfill. And basically, I ended up being signed off sick from this detective job, because it was such a nightmare, without going into the details, but I really, really, really did not enjoy it. I would go so far as to say I hated it. And it's not a word I use a lot, but I really hated it. But it was so stressful. I was thrown in at the deep end. Before I was even a qualified detective, I had like 18 cases that were all mine, just mine. So much pressure. It was insane. And basically I got to a point where I was just not feeling great in my head, in my body, everything. And I ended up going to my GP. I'm bursting into tears on this poor guy. I was like, oh my God. He signed me off sick. And then I ended up, so this was, as I say, just before lockdown. So for the first time in my life, I ended up having some actual space. For, like, literally for the first time in my adult life, I had some time to think and breathe and just be and work out what I wanted to do with my life. Fast forward a few months, and I knew at that point that probably I was never going to go back. I never did. I ended up quitting that job. I ended up becoming my sister's cleaner for a couple of years, and I got a part-time job as a barista in a coffee shop. And I'd never been so goddamn happy in my life, because I just felt like I had agency over my life, and I felt like I had time to think about where I was going. I wasn't in some office job that was taking over my life and my kind of bandwidth. And it was one summer, I've told this story so many times, so apologies if anyone's already heard this. It's also in the book, but I was basically sat outside my flat on this beautiful sunny afternoon, and I was looking through some text messages in a WhatsApp group, some very, very good old friends of mine, all of whom are married with kids. And it just occurred to me, sort of out of nowhere, I was like, oh my God, I'm so grateful that I'm single. And I just felt this real sense of sort of smugness. You know, my friends were like dealing with homeschooling their kids. And I was like, oh my God, that sounds like an absolute nightmare. And rather than feeling like, oh God, I'm the only friend who's single and childless and all the rest of it, I felt the absolute opposite. And it just hit me like a sort of bolt out of the blue that actually, why did everybody see my life path, not me personally, but the single childless life path, as less than or not good or negative or just, you know, not enough or whatever, like you haven't made it, and all of these negative connotations that come with being, you know, a spinster, as you know, I used the podcast, as you already mentioned, the podcast was called Spinsterhood Reimagined. It's now changed to Thrive Solo. But I literally got up from the bench outside my flat and I walked in and I started writing. And I just was completely overtaken by this urge and this desire to kind of just put my side of the story forward and basically just say, do you know what, world? Actually, you guys have got this so wrong. Being single and not having kids gets to be just as wonderful. And also what baffled me and still baffles me to this day is that these sort of underrated benefits and advantages and opportunities that we have from living a single child-free life, they're never talked about. So I, as I say, I sat down and I literally started, it was like this sort of catharsis. I was just like writing. Although what I was writing then is completely different to the book that is coming out, or is now out as you guys listen to this. But I then subsequently, a few months later, decided to start a podcast. And I can't remember the moment that I actually decided or where that kind of came from, but it was just, again, it was this overwhelming desire to talk about this topic and, you know, share my side of the story and kind of just show the world that actually being single and not having kids gets to be bloody great. And then off the back of that, I ended up getting a book deal with Bloomsbury in the UK and with Hay House in the US. And it's now been 3.5 years since I've had the podcast, and I have a membership also called Thrive Solo for single child-free women, which I'm very, very proud of. We're a small group of women. We have live calls every month, and we have a WhatsApp group and we have meetups, and they're just fabulous. And it's just a really wonderful space for like-minded women to kind of feel seen and heard and feel like they're not alone and feel like they're not the only ones. And so, yeah, here I am. Bit of a long story. My apologies.
No, it's an incredible story. And of course, those are just the top level details, right? But again, you and we spoke probably a few years ago now. I'd be really curious to look back in our calendars, at least a couple of years ago, I'd venture to say, maybe longer. And it's incredible what you've built. And I know this is just the very beginning for you, Lucy. You know, it's I'm sure an exciting stopping point along the way, but I want to go back to what you said, you know, this first of all, you having a job at BBC Two, right? Like we have a very international audience, but I think a lot of people are familiar with the BBC. Like this is kind of the quintessential cool place for you to have a job. I think you and I had talked when we first met. I also used to work in radio, and this is very something like kind of glamorous, kind of sexy, very cool. Like you say, for you, you were on the opposite side of the glass as what you perhaps would have liked to have been.
Yeah.
But you left that job. The detective thing, I mean, that sounds like a conversation for a full other day. But you find yourself effectively, signed off of work. You then get a job doing cleaning and barista, which I feel like in a lot of people's eyes, wow, this is like really a rock bottom moment. She doesn't have a partner. She doesn't have children. She's working a couple of part-time jobs, probably at far lesser pay and status than what you had previously. And yet you're looking around thinking, and it's a global pandemic, right? So everybody's feeling the crunch from that. And you're thinking, life is awesome.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, it sounds like not all of this was by design, but I'm interested to know. Now, at that point, you mentioned there was a relationship at BBC Two, but at this point, it sounds like you were then single as well as not having children. Is that correct?
Yes. So basically, before I ended up leaving Radio 2, I had broken up with this guy. And in fact, my reason for doing the detective thing is because, as I mentioned, the relationship was not a good one. And I was kind of looking for a way out. And even though the irony was that I had worked for years to get into Radio 2, it was like what I wanted to do, all the rest of it. And actually the relationship was so bad, and without going into all the details, I essentially lost myself in that relationship, completely lost who I was. It's weird looking back at it because I feel like I was a completely different person. And part of the reason I went for the detective, that what it was a direct entry detective role. So rather than, going the kind of traditional way, because I would never had any desire to go into the police whatsoever. Yeah. But I had always had a bit of a fascination about being a detective. And I'd always been really I did a psychology degree. So I'd always been very interested in how people's minds worked and the criminal mind. And anyway, this opportunity came up where you could apply directly to be a detective. And that was in part motivated by the fact that this guy who I was with was very much, so if I stayed at Radio 2, he didn't work for Radio 2, but I knew him through that world. So I knew that I would still be in the same world as him. Yeah. And at the time, my priority was to get away. But by the time I left Radio 2 and started as a detective, we had broken up several months previous. So, yeah.
Okay. And so had you up to this point, let's talk about the child-free status. Of course, we're the Kids Are Child-Free podcast. I'm curious about, was this an active decision for you? I noticed you used the term childless, which, and as you know, in some circles, we refer to more as child without kids or child-free by circumstance. So for you, up to that point in your life, had you wanted to have kids? Had you always been clear that kids were a no for you? How does that fit up to the kind of beginning of this journey that you're on right now?
Do you know, it's funny because I am one of those women who I am childless by circumstance, or child-free by circumstance, however you want to put it. But basically, I always assumed I would have kids, like so many of us do. I was just the kind of classic woman and girl in as much as I just assumed that down the line I would get married and I would have babies, because that's just what people did. However, I also, by the same token, was never one of those girls who was motivated by motherhood. So even though I assumed it would happen for me down the line, it wasn't something it was by no means a priority. And, in my 20s, where some of my close friends were really starting to talk about it and really think about it as being something that was going to happen in the not too distant future, I was like, what? I am nowhere near there. No way, Jose. I had other dreams. I was much more motivated by what I wanted to do in my life and my career and just, who I was and where I was going. But again, assuming that it would happen down the line. And then I had a series of long-ish, I always laugh when I say that because they really weren't very long at all, but they were long for me. So, sort of 2, 3, 4 year relationships with 2 or 3 really lovely long-term-ish boyfriends. And I ended up walking away from those relationships. They were in my sort of late 20s, through my 30s. And I ended up sort of walking away from those relationships because they didn't feel right for me. And had I really been driven by a need to have children, I might have decided to settle down with one of those guys if having a baby had been my priority, but it absolutely wasn't. And then I found myself approaching 40. And also one thing that's really important to say is that I never felt broody through the whole of my 20s, the whole of my 30s. It was this weird thing. And I remember hearing friends of mine talking about how broody they were. And I was just like, what are they talking about? I literally had never, I just didn't feel it. I'd never had this kind of visceral feeling. I couldn't relate to it. But pretty much as soon as I hit my 40s, it was like, bang, broodiness. Really? Oh my gosh. It hit me like a ton of bricks. It was so unexpected and so bizarre, but I suddenly was like, holy shit, this is what everyone's been talking about. This is what it feels like feels in your body to be broody. And so again, I was sort of in my early 40s. Well, at this point, the boyfriend that I've referred to just now, we actually got together when I was 39. And I remember when we first got together, when things were sort of okay at that point, I was doing that classic thing that girls do, which is like, oh my God, I want to have a baby with him. And I did feel like that. And in fact, at one point, I even thought that I was pregnant. Thankfully, I wasn't. Not just because I wouldn't have wanted to have a baby with him, but also now with hindsight, I'm so grateful that I ended up not having kids. But basically, I did go through a few years of kind of quietly grieving the fact that I hadn't had kids. But it wasn't something I really talked about that much, not least because I found, quite disappointingly, that nobody really asked. None of my friends really sat me down and ever kind of said, oh my God, how do you feel about not having kids? Where are you with that? It just... And I do remember feeling, and I know that they didn't do it in any, mean way. I think it just, maybe they felt awkward about it or uncomfortable about it. Yeah. But there was definitely a time where I felt sad, and I felt, it was more that I just felt such a yearning to have a baby. Yeah. But as I then traveled through my 40s, and I found myself single again, sort of, how old am I now? I'm 49. I've been single for 7.5 years. I found myself single again. And the longer I remained single and I started looking around at all these couples with kids, it started to dawn on me how actually maybe I kind of dodged a bullet in the nicest possible way. Because there are so many benefits to not having children, which I'm sure we'll go more into. Yeah. But it's definitely something that now the reason I now call myself child-free is because that's how I feel. I feel like free of having children in a way that perhaps I didn't 10 years ago, Yeah.
I think it's so important that you share this because it can be... So a lot of the people that I speak with and listeners to this podcast, they feel that this kids or child-free decision is not just being driven by their own desire, but it's also being driven by the circumstances that they're in. And that could be perhaps being unpartnered and not wanting to have a child on their own, or it could be a partner that has different feelings in them, or it could be that they don't feel like they're in a place in their life where they may not be entirely for or against having children, but there is that ambivalence or uncertainty. Yeah. And it can be hard to contend with the part of yourself, however large or small that is, that wants kids if you decide not to. And I think just by nature of the fact that somebody's on the fence, it shows that there is a part of them that wants kids. And so it's this feeling of like, what do I do with that? How do I ever make peace with this? Am I always going to feel sad or wistful or anxious or have this grief around not having a child? And I'm curious, you mentioned there was a period of grief for you. If you can, I know there's no instruction manual on how to grieve, but like, how were you able to process even though today you say, hey, quote, I dodged a bullet, so to speak, and I'm glad about my child-free life. How, when you were in that feeling of yearning and thinking this isn't going to happen for me, and maybe it could have, and we can talk about that, were there possibilities there you could have or would have pursued, and why did you not? But how did you deal with those difficult emotions?
I think first off, I just allowed myself to feel my feelings, and I didn't really ever talk. I think I spoke to my sister a little bit about how I felt, but I didn't really discuss it with anyone. I just kind of dealt with it myself. But one thing I will say is that I don't think that my kind of, whether you can sort of say that there are levels of how much you want a child or how broody you feel, but I don't think I was as broody as perhaps some other women are. So I think that, I think there is nuance, there are many, many shades of gray, and quite clearly, because I'd never made it happen when perhaps I could have done earlier on, I still, even though I suddenly felt the physical feelings of broodiness, I still didn't feel motivated by, oh my God, I just want to be a mother, and being a mother is the be all and end all. And also I have to admit that there was a part of me that kind of felt really deep inside me that actually I was on this planet for a very different reason than to be a mum. And that isn't to say that I don't have moments still to this day. I have moments, but they are brief. And one thing I will say, and I think this is hugely important, and I talk about this a lot on my podcast, talk about this in the membership. Do you know what? We have to make a decision about whether or not we are going to allow this to define us or not. And there is a danger if you wanted kids, whether you really, really wanted them or you're worried that you're going to regret not having them. And let me just add that I have no regret whatsoever. So it is possible to assume you're going to have kids and get married and do all that whole thing. It is possible to get to the other side of that and genuinely not feel regret. But I think, and this is something I talk a lot about on the podcast, and it's something I'm hugely passionate about, is it's a lot to do with our mindset. It's a lot to do with our thinking around things. And I know this can be really super triggering. And I know this because I have lived in victim mentality at times in my life. And if someone had said certain things to me, boy, would it have triggered me. But I think we have to, say you've ended up not having kids, or say you're unable to have kids, or for whatever reason you've ended up without kids. You can either spend the rest of your life defining yourself by not having kids, or you can choose not to define your life by that. And I do think that we have a certain amount of choice. And I think it's also largely to do with where we are in our heads and where we are choosing to place our focus, our energy, our attention. And one thing I've said before is that, for example, I still have kind of residual feelings of broodiness that I get inside of me. So there are times where I might see a really super cute toddler in a supermarket and I will feel it in my gut and I'll be like, oh my God. Or I might see a little baby and feel this overwhelming need to want to mother a baby. However, what I don't do is leave the supermarket or the coffee shop and then scroll through reels of babies on Instagram. What I will do is I will refocus my attention and I won't dwell on it. And the truth is that so much of how we experience life is to do with the lens through which we're looking. And we have agency. We have so much more power and agency over the way that we feel and over the way that our life looks than perhaps many of us realize. And in my experience, it has been down to the, dare I say, the inner work, the work I've done on the way that I think. That has been the game changer for me in terms of how I've now come to be completely at peace and genuinely grateful for not having kids.
Yeah. You're speaking my language so much. I mean, I totally agree with you. And I think that this is why I always like to have as an example for people who are on the fence or who have made an affirmative child-free choice, but who are grappling with it, of there are people who really, really wanted to have a child or children and who are unable to for whatever reasons.
Yeah.
And there are people amongst that group of people that can make peace with that. And like you say, they can reclaim or claim their own identity that doesn't have to be about what they don't have, but rather what they do and how they are living rather than what is not.
Totally.
And then there are people where that does become their story, that does define them. And we had an interesting guest on from the Childless Collective many episodes back, Katie Seppi, and she is childless, circumstantially, although she's also really embraced more this child-free identity. And she sees that amongst her community of women in particular, but all kinds of folks struggling with infertility, for example, or other circumstantial reasons why they can't have kids. And there are people who, yes, of course, there's a time to grieve and we want to feel those emotions and we can honor it when it comes up. You describe it as broodiness. I describe it as wistfulness, but I also sometimes have these feelings of like, ooh, that feels very tender. That's something I'm not going to have. But like, I can allow that to be without then ruminating and having my whole day or week become, oh, and I'm not a mom and I'll never get that. And yet you can become stuck in that. And that becomes some people's entire identities and lives. So
100%. Do you know what you just reminded me? I saw randomly when I was posting on, I try and post every day on Instagram. And what I do when it comes to Instagram is I allow myself to have a quick scroll and then I'll post. And what came up on my feed just this morning about an hour ago, before we're doing this interview, was Alanis Morissette, a singer I love. And I've seen her and she's freaking amazing.
She's going to be in Europe this summer. Are you going to see her?
No, I'm not. Do you know, I don't have tickets, but I did go. I took my niece actually. Oh my God.
Cool.
I saw her about 2 or 3 years ago with my niece in London. She was absolutely incredible. But this reel came up with her daughter on stage singing Ironic. And that was a very good example of a moment where I did feel a tug in my heart of like, oh God, the look that she's giving that little girl, I'll never have that. But it was a moment. And the thing is, it's like anything in life that we end up not doing. And let's face it, we can only do so many things.
Yeah, absolutely.
Anything in life, that we end up not doing, we could regret. We could focus on that. We could obsess over it. But for some reason, we and I think that, obviously having kids is different because it's something that, women are designed to do and all the rest of it. But it also can end up simply being one of the many things in life that we didn't end up doing. It doesn't have to be the thing. And also one thing I would like to add is that I think we forget, especially those of us who really wanted kids, that was kind of what we wanted. We forget that actually we are individual human beings. Our purpose in life is about far more than just one thing, being a mum. Yeah. That's not to say that many women don't get a lot of purpose and meaning and all the rest of it. Of course they do through having kids. But what I'm saying is that I think we forget that we are, autonomous creatures, and we get to find meaning and purpose and direction and fulfillment in other things. And I think when you're really hung up on that, but I wanted to be a mom and I couldn't have them, or I've ended up not having them. And when that becomes your story, it's easy to forget that we live in a massive, beautiful, incredible world with, I think it's nearly 9 billion people now. And to suggest that having a kid is the only way that we can find wonder and beauty and joy and meaning and all of those things, it's just a bit crazy. There's so much out there. So I think we have to, particularly as childless, child-free women without kids, I think maybe it's even more important for us to try and lean into the things that bring us joy and the things that bring us, that give us direction. And I think for anyone, again, if you're a mum, I still think you should be looking outside of your kids, because what happens when they move away? I mean, we all know, I'm sure, mums, or have heard of mums, or have seen them on TV or in films or whatever, who have literally put their entire being into their children. And then they leave home and these women are completely lost because they don't know who they are. And they might have another 30 years of life. So actually, we always need to be working out what lights us up as individuals, because that is just as important as bringing up children in this world. And I think it's really easy to forget that there is so much out there that we can find so much joy and so much fulfillment from that doesn't involve having kids, you know?
I know entirely. This episode, folks listening, we've got to have this one on repeat when we need a boost. This is so good, Lucy. I have nothing more to add. I entirely agree with you. And none of our lives should be defined by or contingent upon having a child, whether we have child or children or not. We can stand in and of ourselves. And I often say to the child-free women in my community that it's a good thing and it's a challenging thing that we often have to, or we are faced with these bigger sort of life questions, I think a little bit sooner sometimes, because I don't want to frame having a child or children as an avoidance, but it can be, even if that's something you really want, to looking at these bigger questions of like, what is my life all about? What really lights me up? Why am I here? And a lot of times these questions just get pushed further down the lane, so to speak, so that as you say, you know, kids grow up, leave home, we still have to address these big questions like, what's this all about? And who am I? And we can do it now or we can do it later. And I think as women without children, typically we need to do it a little bit sooner. But there's a blessing in that as well, because we really get to know ourselves.
Totally. I mean, this is one of the things that I find to be one of the greatest privileges of not having children and being single, is that you get to go truly inwards. And it's not, you know, I know some people, when you're talking about sort of personal growth or self-help or all this, it's not, when I talk about it, it's not in terms of, oh, I have to make myself a better person. That's not how I think of it at all. The way that I think of it is you get to create a better life. You get to create more happiness, more joy, because when you take the time to do that work, it truly can change your life. It's, you know, thought work, when you work on the way that you think. And one of the blessings of not having kids is that you have so much more time and freedom to really dive deep. And also, just speaking to what you just said, Keltie, one thing I will add is that, you know, we've got to remember, and this goes for anyone, it doesn't matter how many children you have or don't have. The truth, as far as I'm concerned, is that happiness has to come from within ourselves. That is, as far as I'm concerned, that is a truth of life for all of us. And the fact of the matter is that, you know, I obviously have women, my audience, my listeners to my podcast, who are both single and don't have kids. And, you know, they might be feeling really down in the dumps. And they think it's because they're single or it's because they don't have kids. But the truth is that even if you end up finding the guy and having the baby, those things can only bring you so much. They cannot sustain your own happiness and your own peace for the rest of your life. They can't. And whatever set point you are at within yourself, you know, within 6 months or a year of having a relationship and or a baby, you're going to go back to that same set point. So all of us should be making the effort to actually make damn freaking sure that we are good alone. And again, that's another wonderful thing about not having kids. And you know, in my case, being single too, is really knowing, like, I know that if I end up single for the rest of my life, it doesn't faze me in the least. It doesn't faze me. I mean, if anything, the way I feel at the moment is like, oh my God, you couldn't get me into a relationship if you paid me, because of all the sacrifices that I would have to make to be in one. The other thing I just wanted to add before I go off on a bit of a tangent, but I thought of it earlier and I don't want to forget, is that we also have to realize, and speaking to what you were saying about how perhaps in some ways, some women who have babies, particularly maybe really early on without much thought, you know, it does kind of stop us from working out, well, what is it that I actually want to do with my life? Well, if I, you know, I'll get married and have a baby, like that's the kind of, I'm not saying that's the easy path, but it's, you know, it's the expected path. It's the traditional path. But actually, I think part of the problem when it comes to perhaps women who, dare I say, regret having kids, which is a thing with some women, because so many of us fall into it without even questioning it, without even thinking about it. And it's a conversation that I've had before on the podcast, which is when you are thinking about bringing an actual human into the world, you don't just do that because it's what people do. You do it because you've really thought about whether it's right for you. Am I the kind of woman who, do I actually want, yes, okay, the fantasy of being a mum sounds great, but actually, what is that going to look, what is that going to make my life look like? And is that what I actually want for my life? Am I willing to spend the next, 18 years putting aside most of my dreams, needs, all of the things, my autonomy, my identity? Is that what I actually want? Because we kind of willy-nilly like go and have a baby because it's just what people do without giving it much thought. And it really is, of all the things that we do in life, having a baby should really be the thing that we give more thought to than almost anything, because it's huge. And also there are so many. I have a second podcast called Three Single Women, and it's with myself and Pip Brown and Rachel Beck. And Rachel was a teacher in New York, and she's talked a lot about how she's seen so many children really struggling because they have parents who are not great parents. And, let's not just fall over ourselves and without really thinking about what is actually an incredibly serious decision.
Yeah. It's a compliment for everyone who's listening, because the fact that people are tuning in and questioning this decision, it's easy when you're the one doing the questioning to feel like there's something wrong with you, but it shows me that you are living a deliberate, intentional life that not just for yourself, but also for any future children you'll have. It's incredible. And I think we need to give ourselves a pat on the back for being so conscientious that way.
Yeah, 100%. It's so true.
All right, I have a very important invitation to make, and that is to join us for one of our upcoming Kids or Child-Free workshops. If you have not attended one of these 2-hour workshops and you are unsure whether you should have kids or stay child-free, this is the next thing on your to-do list to getting clear on the right choice for you. Head to kidsorchildfree.com. I will also link to our workshop page in the show notes and get all the details on this 2-hour live online workshop that's going to help you get more clarity and direction in terms of whether a future with kids or a future without them is the right path for you. Tickets are only $45, and we have these workshops every month or two, so you should be able to find a date and time that works for you. If you can't join the upcoming date, make sure you sign up for emails so that you can get notified when the next date is announced.
I want to hear more about life as a single child-free woman and what specifically is so amazing. Like, you've mentioned a couple things, but tell us a few more of your favorite things. And of course, we have to tell people to check out the book, because you do an incredible job of giving a really comprehensive view of all of the perks, the joys, the gifts in child-free single living.
Thanks, Keltie.
Give us a teaser.
The book is called Shiny Happy Singles if you're in the UK, but it's called Thrive Solo if you're in the US or Canada. It really is a celebration of being single and child-free. I think, dare I say, it might be the first book ever that actually celebrates both of those things, because there's always...
Which is incredible. And wild.
Well, thank you. I'll take that.
Yeah.
But I think it deserves it. And actually, what the book does not aim to say, oh, well, look over here, it's so much better being single and not having kids. No. All it aims to do is to point out all of the bloody marvelous things about being single and not having kids. And also to say, do you know what? This is an equally good life path. We've been conditioned for so long to believe that the pinnacle of life, the pinnacle of being a human being, is to couple up, get married, have babies. And we've forgotten that there is this whole other path that has just as many joys. Yeah, it has just as many sorrows. But guess what? That's not because it's single and child-free. That's because it's called being a human being. It's life. Whatever path you go down, there is going to be darkness and light. There is going to be joy and sorrow. And what I want people to realize is that actually being single has just as many fabulous things about it as being married in a relationship does. And, obviously there are things that when you're single and you don't have kids, there are things that you're never going to experience if you if you were married and you had kids. But by the same token, being single and not having kids allows you to experience things that you're never going to experience if you're married with kids. And, you know, some of it always blows my mind when I think about these underrated benefits. They're not even underrated. They're just not acknowledged. Like, they're just not talked about. These huge benefits, like the freedom that comes with being both single and not having kids is wild, and it's wonderful. And also little things. Well, I say little, but I think this is what we do. We brush off. We hold up the benefits and the upsides of being married and having kids, and we hide away all of the darkness and all of the challenges. But when it comes to single life, we hold up the so-called negatives and the downsides, but we totally hide away all of the great things about it. And the truth is that there are as many wonderful things about being single as there are wonderful things about being married. There are as many wonderful things about not having kids as there are wonderful things about having kids. And, you know, seeing as this podcast is obviously specifically about being, you know, not having kids, it's like, when you actually think about, particularly here we are in 2025, I mean, one of the many reasons I'm so grateful for not having kids is not having to deal with the huge rise in mental health issues in young people, screens, what social media and screens are doing to our children, having to deal with a daughter who's got to deal with selfies. And, you know, it honestly, there are so many terrifying things about having kids. And it is true that mental health issues and behavioral issues are on the rise. I talk about it in the book. What we don't do, and this is not meaning to say, oh my God, having kids is awful. Of course, there are wonderful things about it. But I just want to point out that there are also things about being a mum that are incredibly difficult and incredibly challenging. And we don't talk about them. We romanticize having kids. And I only need to talk to my very good girlfriends, all of whom have kids, to know that it ain't no fairy tale, but we've been led to believe it's a fairy tale. And when it comes to being single, like, we forget about these things like just peace and autonomy. And I talk about emotional stability. You know, and living on your own, when you live alone, you are not having to contend with anybody else's moods or anybody else's tantrums or anybody else's mess all over the house. Or, you know, I think people have this image of, you know, a single childless woman living alone as some kind of sad loser. I bloody love living by myself. I absolutely love it. It is a joy. And the other women I talked to in the book, because I interviewed about 30 women for this book, you know, their stories are in there too. But going back to emotional stability, because this is something I think is really underrated and not spoken about, is, you know, when you are at the mercy of a husband and children, whether those kids are the most wonderful kids in the world and whether your husband is the most wonderful husband in the world, your moods are impacted by theirs, and their issues impact you. Their problems, their worries, their joys, their sorrows, it impacts your life. And actually, one of the most wonderful things about being single and not having kids is just this peace in your life that I think is so underrated, because it's not a small thing. To really feel peaceful is pretty major, and that is certainly an advantage and a benefit of being single and not having kids that just doesn't get talked about, you know. So those are just a couple of the things. All of, you know, I talk about this and a lot more in the book, obviously.
Yeah. And I have to say, I'm child free, but I am partnered. And I was reading the book, and I said to my husband the other day, I said, do you ever wish you could just live on your own? He goes, yeah, sometimes. I said, yeah, me too. Because I mean, you paint such an incredible and valid picture. And I've lived on my own in the past, which I know some people, you know, it's kind of straight from living at home with parents to maybe roommates to a partner. And it's a gift to just have your own surroundings and space and peace, and how you describe this sanctuary, as it sounds like so many of the women talk about. It really is a gift. And I'm interested to know, why do you think there's so much pity and scorn for women without children who are single or living solo? Like, why do we feel so sorry for them or think this is the worst thing that could possibly happen?
Well, I think it's just a story that we've been telling for centuries. It's as simple as that. I think it's so ingrained in the societal narrative. It's just so, woven into the fabric of society. I mean, one of the women I interviewed for the book, who's also one of my fabulous Thrive Solo members, she was talking about how it's basically like it's kind of tattooed on our skins, and from very, very, very young, especially girls, are fed this story of this is what you'll do. You're looking for Prince Charming. This is your aim in life. You are looking for Prince Charming, and then you're going to marry him, and then you're going to have babies. And that is your aim in life as a woman. That is what is going to provide you with happiness. And so I think, it's therefore automatically assumed that if you don't have that, then it's the opposite, and it's sad and lonely and miserable and the rest of it. And again, it's just that we've hidden away. We haven't taught, these benefits have been kept in the dark for so long. And this is why I think it's so important that they are brought into the light only in a fair, equal way to say, yeah, being married with kids can be wonderful, but so can being single without them. And it doesn't, it is not a life of lack, because I, for one, do not feel that I lack any love in my life. I have family, I have great friends, I have a community, or I have my Thrive Solo membership. I'm constantly in communication, and I feel connected to so many people, not least my divine cat, who is frankly the only man I will ever need. I genuinely don't feel like I lack anything. But you know what? That word there is sometimes part of the problem. It's that classic thing of the lady doth protest too much. If you say, no, but I really am happy single. It's like, but really? And it's this one of the narratives that annoys me the most, or one of the assumptions that annoys me the most and kind of triggers me the most, is when people essentially make out like you're lying if you say that you're genuinely happily single without kids. There's always this really, is she really, come on. And that's why I think my book is important, because we've got to normalize this, not least because there are more and more single people on this planet, and we still seem to think that singles are this like tiny minority group, and it's just bollocks, excuse my French. It's just not the case anymore. If you look at the stats, don't ask me, I can't remember them off by heart, but they're in the book. But the number of single people is on the rise worldwide, and it's only, it looks as if it's going to continue increasing. And also, may I just point out that single childless women are the happiest demographic in society. Single women and married men, funnily enough. And it honestly doesn't surprise me, not least because I think when you're so good at being alone, and when you just are so comfortable in your own company, and you love living alone, and you love your solitude and all of these things that come with being single, you're actually in a far better position than many women who have thrown themselves into marriage and babies and then suddenly find themselves alone. Because also, let's not forget, there are no guarantees. People leave, people die, shit happens, So it doesn't surprise me that single childless women are one of the happiest demographics.
Yeah. No, me neither. And I can confirm the statistic. I have read and heard cited myself many times. So she speaks the truth, friends. All right. We have a few questions. I told our audience that you were coming on the podcast, which everyone is very excited to hear from you. And I know they're going to love this conversation. If you're loving this, send me or Lucy a message. And of course, even more importantly than telling us you love it, go buy either Thrive Solo if you're in Canada or the States, or Shiny Happy Singles if you're in the UK. Is that for Europe as well? If somebody is in Germany, for example, or they, probably.
Isn't this awful? I'm not sure, but what I do know is that
this is your test run for your other conversations.
Oh my God, isn't this terrible? But I tell you one thing is that one of my Thrive Solo members, bless her, in fact, more than one of them have ordered Shiny Happy Singles to the States. So there is, so I'm pretty sure that if you're in Germany, yeah, you can order it, because you can order stuff to a different country on Amazon, can't you?
Yeah, sure.
Do I sound totally
and it's probably
clueless?
better to get the book depending like where you're closest to, and
Exactly.
with the
I mean,
internet,
if
all
you're in
things are
Europe,
possible.
yeah, exactly. But yes, thank you.
Okay, so we have a few questions for Lucy, and the first one is whether you've created any non-traditional milestones to publicly celebrate instead of a wedding, for example. Have you done anything like this, or know of single women who have?
Well,
child-free women.
I would say getting a book deal is probably a pretty big milestone for me, which I honestly don't think I would have done had I got married and had kids. And that's not because the book is about being single. I just know myself. And if I'd got married and had kids, I just know that I wouldn't have got around to writing a book. So there is a milestone. But gosh, I mean, I'm on the spot now. I can't.
Are you going to celebrate the book? Is there a party happening? Have you bought yourself something? Are you going on a trip somewhere? What are you going to do?
Well, I'm actually not, because I'm not having a book launch. I sound like a complete loser, don't I? But if you read the book, you will find out that I am an introvert, even though I'm an extroverted introvert. So I love being around people. I'm very kind of loud and confident around people. I'm not sort of, quiet and shy and retiring. However, I am an introvert. So to be honest with you, there was talk of having like a launch party, but it filled me with so much anxiety that I was just like,
sounds like a nightmare,
right? I don't need to do this. So I'm not going to do it. And when I spoke to Bloomsbury about it, they were like, look, it's not as it used to be. And a lot of authors don't have launch parties. It's not a given anymore, as in the same way that a book tour is not a given. So as for what I'm doing to market, I actually don't yet know. I'm down in Dorset at the moment. I may go up to my sister's in London. I have a flat in London, but it's currently being rented out, reasons I won't bore you with. But I don't know. I kind of don't feel like I need that sort of major moment in the spotlight. I feel like it will almost be more like a quiet sense of real satisfaction just in myself, by myself, if that makes sense. Don't know if that's a very good answer.
Absolutely. No, it gave me a sense of, yes, I've done this, and how incredible. I hope you'll bask in that. And I think I love this idea. And of course we see Instagram reels and stuff saying, oh, we can celebrate getting a PhD, or we can, and absolutely 100%, those celebrations are totally warranted. And it also still kind of follows the script of it has to be public. It has to encompass and include all people. I mean, I did marry, and I was very clear I actually didn't want to marry. Administrative purposes, my husband and I married, but we eloped because I didn't have the desire to be in that spotlight, to spend, an outpouring of cash for this one day. Instead, we did it as simple as we could in Seychelles, which, sounds very luxe, but it was bare bones. Like, I just want 5 good photos sort of thing. And I want a nice trip, and I want to be able to get my German visa, which it happens. So yeah, I think I like this idea of figuring out if there are milestones for yourself, whether or not that's having children and getting married, or celebrating your child-free status, or the new home you move into, or the book deal, that it doesn't have to be following this particular script, just like any one of these paths doesn't have to look the way that we have been told it should.
Totally. And in fact, I've just thought of one thing that has just made me smile to myself. But actually, so I've been single for nearly 8 years, but I do plan on celebrating my 10-year anniversary of being single. So there's an anniversary that we can celebrate.
I love that. Are you going to marry yourself? I've heard of this.
Do you know what? I've heard of it too. I personally wouldn't know. I might marry my cat, but no. I was
going to ask if you were going to marry Johnny Depp, but then I realized that sounded a little bit weird. Her cat's name's Johnny Depp, folks.
Yes.
Don't do that.
Say, he genuinely, he is the love of my goddamn life. He truly is. I adore him.
He's the most handsome cat that ever was, and I'm sure he's a doll as well. I just haven't met him, so.
Oh, he's so
okay.
naughty.
Another question we have. Yeah. Oh, we love our animals. My little lady just came and laid underneath the table here. So,
is she with you in Croatia?
Shiro with me. She is. Yeah, we were lucky to be able to drive here from Munich. It's about 9 hours to Split, so we didn't overnight on the way here, and then quick ferry ride over 2 hours, so not too long. Is there anything you would have done differently when you were in your 30s?
In terms of being single and not having kids?
She didn't specify. I don't know. Maybe
Okay.
just in general. Maybe the way you view the decision, maybe it has nothing to do with the kids are child-free question.
Okay. I know what my answer to that is. It's actually quite an easy answer, which encompasses kind of everything. If I could go back, I would start working on my mindset as soon as was humanly possible. It's something that I sort of stumbled upon about 5 years ago properly. Like I've always, we've all heard about mindset and we've heard about the importance of our thoughts and all of this stuff. And it's something I'd always, kind of been on the periphery of my life, but I'd never really dived into it in any detail. Had I known in my 30s how much of an impact my thinking was having on my life, I would have done the work and made the changes necessary so much sooner. So that would be my main message to anybody, is that your thoughts are having so much more of an impact on your life than you realize. So please dive into all of the personal growth books and realize that, you're like in the same way that your thoughts can negatively impact your life, your thoughts can also hugely positively impact your life. And the words you say too, so much of life is about the way that we are perceiving it. And that takes work. I think we have to be vigilant. So, anyone who wants any book recommendations, do feel free to send me an email. I'm a complete personal growth book junkie. I've read, I'm my very favorite book actually, which I mentioned in my book.
I was going to say, give us one or two. You've got me on the edge of my seat. I'm like, just tell us now. Give us one or two.
Well, I would always start with Napoleon Hill. And one of his books is called Outwitting the Devil, which I actually do mention in Shiny Happy Singles / Thrive Solo, which is an incredible book. Also, his classic Think and Grow Rich is incredible. And it's not just about getting rich. It's about so much more than that. It's about how essentially, and I mentioned this earlier on in this conversation, but we have got to learn to focus our energy and our attention on the things that we want, not the things that we don't want. And what most of us do, and myself included for a long, long time, is we focus our attention and we talk about and we think about everything that is going wrong, everything that we don't want, instead of focusing our attention and thinking about and talking about all of the things that we desire and that we do want. So in answer to this person's question, sorry, it's been a very sort of rambling answer, but that actually would be my kind of key piece of advice.
Yeah.
Just learn to think about, talk about, focus on the things that you want. And also this kind of goes along with this, and I do talk about this in the final section of the book is all about kind of mindset, and it's actually 8 practical tips, one of which is be incredibly mindful of what you are allowing into your mind, because what we don't realize is how much the conversations that we're having, the people we're hanging out with, the amount of news we're watching, who we're following on social media, all of these things that are going into our minds are impacting the way that we feel and are subsequently impacting the way that we think, and therefore the actions that we take and the results that we get and the life that we see before us. So for God's sake, be mindful of what you're consuming in your mind.
I couldn't agree more. And it's funny because I haven't articulated that for myself, but I would credit so much of my own life and the joy and fulfillment that I have and everything in my life. Certainly I have a degree of privilege that I want to acknowledge, but the way I view my life and the world and the choices I make and focusing on what is versus what if, like that, it's everything. I'm not surprised to hear that that's been so instrumental in your journey and that it's something you wish you would have done even sooner. And I would say it has so much to do with this decision too, for those of you listening who are on the fence about kids, child-free. Like, be really mindful about what you're paying attention to and the messages you're getting and the Instagram videos and the articles you're reading, because it has a huge bearing on how you feel about either of these choices and ultimately like how you're going to go about making this choice.
Totally. It's everything. It really is. It's so huge. And we should be taught this in school. We really should.
Absolutely. Yeah. Okay, we have one more question, and this one is about if you have any tips for finding or growing friendships with other single and or child-free people, specifically in your 30s and 40s, which we know a lot of people are off doing, the other thing, partnered up, they have kids. So how would you suggest connecting with like-minded folks?
Come and join Thrive Solo, my membership.
Yeah, absolutely. Good plug. Yeah.
I mean, but for real, there is no better way to normalize the way that you feel about being single and not having kids than joining a community of women who are single and don't have kids. It is the way. So whether it's my community or another community, find other single women. And actually, when it comes to how, we have to put ourselves out of our comfort zone, don't we? And, and actually having said that we want to find communities of other single women without kids, also, we just want to find people who we can connect with, who are on the same wavelength as us, whether or not they're married and whether or not they have kids. And I think it becomes it can be really hard to find new friends as you get older. Adult friendship is a whole topic in itself that can be really, really hard for people. You know what? We have to put ourselves out of our comfort zone, like so many other things in life. Putting yourself out of your comfort zone, making the moves, asking for the phone number, and also doing things that bring you joy. Go to, it sounds so cliche, doesn't it? But, go horse riding with a group if that's what you love, because connecting with like-minded people, whether that's because they're single and they don't have kids or because they love horse riding or whatever it is. But ultimately, we got to put ourselves out there, because new friendships are not going to fall into our laps. But also the other thing is to not be offended if somebody doesn't seem to want to be a friend. Because I've been in situations before where I've been like, oh my God, I really want to be friends with that woman. She looks so cool. And then it just hasn't happened and she's clearly not interested. But that's okay. We're not for everyone. We're not for everyone.
Totally.
So be really open-minded and, be okay with rejection, and do not take it personally, because it's not personal. We're all different. And you have to keep putting yourself out there.
I was just going to add, sometimes we don't have that capacity either, right? It sometimes has nothing to do with that person. Just to piggyback on this idea of we're not for everyone, sometimes it's just not the right timing too. Like I've met wonderful, nice, kind people who've said, oh, we should have a coffee or connect. And while I would generally say I'm open to that, sometimes it's like, I'm just trying to connect with those friends I have, or, I haven't been on a date with my husband for a month, or whatever people have going on in their lives. We just need to realize that, again, move along. Next, it really is nothing personal. Totally. And sometimes it goes one way and sometimes the other, where you're the one who's keen for that relationship. And sometimes maybe you don't have the space or the desire, or it's winter and you just want to hibernate. Whatever
100%. And we've all been that person, haven't we? Who said, oh yeah, we should totally meet up and go for coffee. And then have done absolutely nothing about it. I've certainly done that. And I'm sure I've had that done to me too. But I really do think that if you are looking to meet new people, I mean, truly come and join Thrive Solo if you're looking for a community of single women, because it's a community I'm really genuinely proud of. And I am, just FYI, I'm very much there. Like I am in it. I'm not like, oh yeah, thanks for signing up. Bye. See you later. I'm like all over it. I'm on all the live calls. I'm in the WhatsApp group regularly. And have a look at the sort of testimonials. It's lucymeggeson.com/Thrive Solo, and you can read some testimonials and see what other people think. But it really is a lovely community, and I know that the women in there have really benefited from it, and largely because it helps you to feel less alone and less like you're a freak. Because let's face it, the world can sometimes make us feel like we're a freak if we're not married and we don't have kids. So yeah.
We will make sure to link to that in the show notes, so you don't have to go searching for it if you didn't catch the web address. Is there anything we haven't talked about that you want to touch on still or share with our listeners?
No, I don't think so. I mean, except just to say, God, I would love it if you bought the book. This is the first book I've ever written, and boy, has it been a journey. But I really, what I will say about the book is, whether you are happily single and child-free or not, it's I think it's going to be a great read to either really validate your experience if you're already feeling good about it, but you feel like you're the only one and you're like, why does nobody else talk about this? It's going to really validate you. But if you're not, I mean, I think you'd be hard pushed to read this book and not feel a teensy bit better about being single and not having kids, because it really is a celebration. And I don't ignore all of the bad things. I do mention certain things, and I certainly don't dwell on them because that's not what it's about. But absolutely, it is going to make you feel more empowered and more hopeful and more positive. And also, it's not that long. It's quite an easy read. What do you think, Keltie?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so.
No, I agree. It's very digestible. And I love the 8 suggestions you had at the back, more for like, how do we implement some of these mindsets and view our lot in life if we've chosen to be child-free and or single. And also, I mean, as a child-free woman, I still found so much value from the book. And even if you're someone, let's say you're leaning towards having kids and you're partnered, I think it's so important that we see and understand different people's perspectives on life, their lived experiences. It might help change your mind. Perhaps you consider that single child-free friend of yours with a little bit of pity. You might not like to admit it, but a lot of times when someone lives a different path than us, we can look at it sort of thinking, oh, well, that doesn't seem so nice. Well, they might not be as bad off as you think. And of course, it can also be a wonderful gift. So I will say what Lucy might not say, which is, yes, of course, buy the book. But if you're listening to this, especially, so any time to buy the book is great. But if you happen to be tuning in, I know we've got some enthusiastic listeners who love listening Wednesdays. It makes a big difference for a book launch when we've got all these sales that can kind of be let out of the gate on the 19th of June when it's going to be released. So go. And is that the US as well, by the way, or is that just your UK publication date?
The US is the 24th of June. So it's the 19th in the UK and the 24th of June in the US and Canada. But Keltie, thanks for saying that, because I didn't realize until very recently how crucial pre-sales and first week sales are. So
truly.
Yeah, they really are.
Yeah. I try, and if there's a book I want to buy that I know is coming out, it's easy to think, oh, I'll just mark that on my calendar or buy it once it's out. Just do yourself a favor, pre-order it, and it'll be a nice surprise when it arrives. It's like, I love when I've done this with cookbooks and stuff and they come in the mail and I'm like, oh my gosh, I ordered this like 3 months ago. So even if it's not for yourself, consider gifting a copy, local library, one of those share bookshelves. But I know you will enjoy and love reading it. And Lucy, I just thank you so much. This conversation has been such a gift, and I know is going to help and be so eye-opening for all of our listeners. So,
thank you so much. You're really, really kind. It's been fabulous to talk to you, and thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we hope to have you back here soon for more mindset perspectives, because I really love what you shared on that front as well. So,
it's my favorite topic. Lucy. I can talk about it until the cows come home. I love it.
Yeah,
I'm obsessed.
I can tell. Okay, we can share some book recos or something like that.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, have a wonderful day. And thank you everyone for listening.
You too. Lots of love.
All right. I've been a little bit lax with you lately. Allow me to explain. So I get messages on Instagram to my DMs or emails pretty much every single day from you saying how much you love the podcast, how you've discovered the work I'm doing through the podcast, how much you love the conversations on the podcast. Lots of praise. Yes, it is wonderful for my ego. I always enjoy getting these messages. It makes me feel really grateful and appreciative when you take the time to reach out. But the reason I say I've been a little bit lax lately is because when I first started the podcast, if I get positive feedback from anyone about an episode or the show, I would say, I would love for you to do me a favor and leave a rating or a review on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. And the last 2-3 months, I haven't been asking as much because, it's hard sometimes as a business owner and as a podcaster to say, hey, can you do me a little favor? But a big way the podcast gets discovered is through ratings and reviews. And it helps us to reach more people. And they really do make such a difference. I also, of course, love having this sort of social proof, if you will, to be able to show people this is what other people are saying and thinking about the podcast you want to tune into. So my ask of you, whether or not you've been one of those people who sent me a lovely note in the last 2-3 months, if I haven't asked you, I would love for you to leave either a rating and review on Apple Podcasts or a rating on Spotify. We are so close to cracking 200 5-star ratings or reviews on Spotify. We're 9 away right now. Can we get there in the next week? I would love to get to 200 5-star reviews or ratings, I should say, on Spotify. So if you are listening and you have not yet done so, go into the app, Whether you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, please leave a rating or review. It will seriously take you 1 minute of your time, and I will be very grateful, and it will go a really long way to helping this podcast get out into more people who are on the fence's ears. That was a mouthful. All right. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.